wind howls across the Great Plains at -30 degrees. Snow erases the horizon. Somewhere far from any city, a retired Navy SEAL steps into a storm that has killed unprepared men in minutes. Beside him walks Shadow, an aging military dog who scarce tells stories no medals ever could. They are alone. No backup, no technology, just hold, memory, and instinct. Then, through the white chaos, they find it. A single tippy standing against the wind, built centuries ago by hands that understood survival better than modern science ever did. Inside that shelter is more than warmth. There is a lesson that will change how this man understands strength, loss, and belonging forever. What happens next will show you how ancient wisdom can still save modern lives. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe no one should face the cold, grief, or life's storms alone, subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs it. Chapter 1 begins in a small plains city that winter never truly forgives. The place has a name on the map, one of those modest dots surrounded by endless grassland. But in January, it feels less like a town and more like an outpost left behind by time. The streets are straight and practical, cut through neighborhoods of low houses with steep roofs, each roofline burdened by wind-packed snow. Light posts wear icy collars. Storefront windows are filmed with frost, as if the glass itself is trying to hide. The sky is a hard, pale sheet, the kind that turns everything colorless and makes distance look deceptive. Even sound seems to shrink. Engines start with a reluctant cough, footsteps squeak, and then vanish into the white hush. The air bites at any exposed skin in seconds. An honest, punishing cold that doesn't negotiate. The wind is the true ruler here. It comes out of the open country and slides between buildings like it owns the keys. It shoves snow into corners, into door seams, into the mouths of alleys. A weatherboard outside the gas station flashes a number that feels like an insult. 22 digv, -30 Celsius. People in this town know the math without translating. They simply know what it does to lungs, to fingers, to the small courage required just to walk from one door to another. A man stands near the edge of the parking lot, half sheltered by a low concrete wall, watching the wind drag streamers of snow across the asphalt. His name is Mason Cole. He is in his late 30s, tall without looking lanky, built the way a lifetime of training builds someone. Dense in the shoulders, lean through the waist, posture held upright by habit even when fatigue tries to fold him. He has the weathered face of a person who has spent too many nights awake, sharp cheekbones, a straight nose that has healed cleanly after being broken once, and a jawline that looks carved rather than grown. A close-cut beard shadows his mouth and chin, not styled for fashion, but kept short at the way some men keep their lives. Controlled, minimal, functional. His hair is dark, cropped tight, and dusted with tiny crystals of ice that cling to him like unwanted metals. His eyes are gray-blue, alert by training, yet carrying the slight distance of someone whose mind still checks corners even in a quiet town. Mason is a Navy SEAL, retired, at least on paper. The kind of man people assume must be fearless. The truth is more complicated. He knows fear intimately, the way a sailor knows storms. What shaped him most wasn't a single firefight or a headline-worthy mission, but the long accumulation of choices made under pressure, and one decision in particular that refuses to lie down inside his memory. Months ago, in a desert far from this snow, a teammate didn't come home. Mason had done everything right, according to procedure. He'd moved fast. He'd called it in. He'd kept going. But everything right is not the same as enough, and the difference has made a quiet home in him. It shows in the way he rarely laughs now, in the way he speaks politely but sparingly to strangers, in the way his hands sometimes clench and unclench as if rehearsing a grip. At his heel sits Shadow. Shadow is a German Shepherd mix with the unmistakable stance of a working dog. Front paws aligned, shoulders squared, attention tuned like a dial. He is older now, around 10, his muzzle powdered with gray that makes him look wise and tired at the same time. A thin scar splits the furs above one eye, a pale line against darker coat, earned long ago and worn without drama. His ears are still mostly upright, though one tips slightly at the end as if it has learned the value of listening more than announcing. His eyes are deep brown, steady, and unusually expressive. They don't dart like a nervous animal's, they evaluate like a partner's. Shadow's coat is thick for winter, but even so, he wears a rugged harness and a simple insulated vest. Gear meant for function, not cuteness. The dog's personality is calm, professional, and stubborn in a way that feels almost human. He doesn't whine, he doesn't panic. He merely judges the world and chooses loyalty anyway. Shadow is also the one creature on Earth who has seen Mason at his worst and stayed. Mason glances down at him and gives a small nod, a private signal that means, "We move." Shadow rises immediately, snow crunching under his paws. Together they cross the lot toward an aging pickup truck with mud-caked wheel wells and a layer of salt on the paint. The truck isn't new and doesn't try to be. It's built like the town, plain, durable, and slightly battered. Inside the cab, warmth arrives slowly, like a reluctant friend. Mason's breath fogs in front of his face as he turns the key. The engine turns over once, twice, then catches with a rough growl. He rests his forehead briefly against the steering wheel, not in defeat, but in the kind of pause that comes when a man knows the road ahead will test him. Shadow climbs into the passenger side footwell, circles once with deliberate care, his joints stiff in the cold, and settles. The plan, if it can be called that, is simple. Drive out of town, follow the highway until it becomes smaller roads, then dirt tracks, then open land. Mason has heard stories from an old historian he met months ago at a rehabilitation program, an elderly man who spoke of the Great Plains not as empty space, but as a place layered with genius. He talked about teepee camps that could withstand winter temperatures that would break modern tents, about shelter systems refined by centuries, about communities that didn't merely endure the cold but made it livable. Mason had listened with the kind of half-interest he usually reserved for polite conversation, until one detail pierced him. The shelters were designed with an intelligence that turned wind and smoke and heat into allies. A home that knew how to breathe. That idea stayed with him. A home that breathes. Not a bunker, not a prison, something alive. So here he is, choosing cold over comfort, not because he craves punishment, but because something in him suspects the numbness he carries can't be thawed in safe rooms. He needs a place where survival demands presence, where his mind cannot drift backward because the present will bite too hard. The truck rolls out onto a two-lane road lined with leafless trees that rattle like bones in the wind. The city falls behind quickly. Its streetlights vanish into the pale blur. Ahead stretches the prairie, a wide, white ocean, interrupted only by fence lines and the occasional dark shape of a barn, hunched against weather. Snow snakes across the road in thin sheets. The sky presses down. Mason keeps both hands on the wheel, gaze steady, scanning for ice patches. Shadow's head stays lifted, nose working. The dog's breath is quiet but constant, a soft engine of life in the cold. As the miles pass, the landscape grows simpler and more intimidating. There is nowhere to hide, nothing to block the wind. The cold feels more direct out here, less filtered by buildings and human activity. The truck heater struggles, and the cab never becomes truly warm. Mason's fingertips ache even through gloves. When he flexes them, the joints complain. He notices the way his body instinctively tries to conserve heat, shoulders inching inward, chin lowering. He forces himself to relax. Tension wastes energy. He knows that, the way he knows a dozen survival rules without thinking. A gust hits the truck broadside, and it wobbles. Mason corrects smoothly. Shadow shifts his weight and braces, then looks up at him with a glance that somehow reads like dry humor. "Really? We picked today?" Mason huffs a breath that could be a laugh if it had more air in it. "Yeah," he murmurs, as if the dog needs the explanation. "Today." They turn off the main road into a narrower track. The truck's tires chew through drifted snow. The world becomes even quieter. Mason checks a simple map marked with notes from the historian, areas where old camps were said to have stood, places where the land naturally offers some break from wind. He isn't hunting artifacts. He isn't chasing a romantic fantasy. He's chasing a lesson, how people once lived here, and what that kind of living might teach a modern man who has forgotten how to feel at home in his own skin. After another stretch, the truck can't go farther. Snow has piled too high, and the wheels begin to spin. Mason stops, kills the engine, and listens to the sudden silence. It is vast. It presses against the cab like water against glass. He looks at Shadow. "All right, partner." Shadow stands immediately, tail low but steady. Mason pulls on a heavier outer layer, checks a small pack of essentials, lighter, knife, first aid, a couple of energy bars, a compact hatchet. He clips a lead to Shadow's harness more for safety than control. Then they step out into the open. The cold hits like a slap. It steals breath. It turns eyelashes brittle. The wind threads through any gap in clothing and finds skin with cruel accuracy. Mason's boots crunch down, and the snow squeals in protest. Shadow's paws sink and lift rhythmically, purposeful, uncomplaining. The dog's nose moves side to side, reading invisible information with every breath. They walk. The prairie is not flat the way people imagine. It rolls in long, subtle waves, and in those dips the wind changes texture, sometimes a knife, sometimes a heavy hand. Mason follows the map and the logic of the land, heading toward a low rise where the historian claimed, "The old people like to set their homes." He keeps his pace measured. Sweat is dangerous here. Wet clothing becomes a death sentence. He thinks of that as he thinks of many things. The discipline of restraint, the patience of not pushing too hard, the wisdom of moving like you belong to the weather rather than fighting it. After a while, Shadow stops abruptly. His ears lift. His body goes still, not fearful, focused. Mason follows the line of the dog's gaze. There, ahead, half sheltered behind the rise, stands a shape that doesn't belong to random nature. A cone rising from the snow, darker against the white, with a posture that feels intentional. It is not large, but it is unmistakably human-made. For a moment, Mason wonders if he's imagining it, if the cold is rewriting his vision. But Shadow gives a soft, single bark, the kind used in work, not play. Confirmation. Mason's chest tightens with something that is not panic and not exactly hope, but close to both. He walks toward it, slowly, as if approaching a sleeping animal that might spook. As he gets nearer, details sharpen. Poles angled upward, their ends visible like ribs. A cover pulled taut, weathered but intact. Snow is banked around the base in a way that looks deliberate, not accidental. The entrance faces east, away from the worst of the wind, as if the structure has been taught to respect the sun. A teepee. Mason stands still, letting the wind whip past him, and he feels a strange reverence settle in his bones. This is not a museum piece behind glass. This is a solution. A promise someone once built with their hands so their children could live. He thinks of those hands, women's hands, the historian said. Women who knew the weight of poles, the language of hides, the patience of sewing. He imagines them working with calm authority while winter gathered its teeth outside. Shadow steps forward first, sniffing the edge of the entrance. Then the dog looks back at Mason, as if asking permission the way he used to before entering a room on deployment. Mason nods. Go. Shadow ducks in. Mason follows, pulling the flap aside, and the world changes in a single step. The wind vanishes. The sound softens. The air is not warm, not yet, but it is calmer, protected, breathable. The space smells faintly of old smoke and hide, and something earthy, like dried grass. Light filters in from the top, pale and steady. Mason pauses there, half inside, half out, and realizes something with a clarity that startles him. For the first time in a long time, he is not thinking about what might happen next, or what already happened before. He is simply here, in the present, in the cold, in a shelter that has outlived countless storms. Shadow stands a few feet in, looking around with alert curiosity, tail giving one slow wag. Small, controlled, but unmistakably pleased. Mason exhales, long and careful. All right, he whispers, voice barely more than breath. Let's learn how this place breathes. And with that, Chapter 1 ends exactly where it should. The seal and his dog have entered the ancient shelter, not yet saved, not yet healed, but finally positioned at the doorway of something older than their pain. Deepens the moment that Chapter 1 ended on. Mason and Shadow have stepped into the teepee, and the outside world, bitapambiyin teethy of cold, the endless white, has been muted like a door closed on a raging ocean. The interior is dim but readable, lit by a thin column of daylight that filters down from the smoke opening high above. The light doesn't brighten so much as outline. It sketches the angles of the poles, the curve of the walls, the gentle slope of the floor, where packed snow has hardened into a stubborn, uneven base. The air is not warm, but it is calmer, less predatory. Mason stands still long enough to let his lungs stop arguing with the cold. He listens the way he once listened in unfamiliar rooms overseas, for movement, for threat, for the smallest clue that a space is either safe or lying. There is only the quiet creak of wood settling, and the soft sound of Shadow's harness as the dog turns a slow circle, nose sweeping the ground, then the lower edges of the wall. Shadow's tail moves once, twice, measured, satisfied. In the language of working dogs, it reads like approval, not excitement. Mason steps farther inside and lowers his shoulders, easing out of the defensive posture his body has held since leaving the truck. He slides the entrance flap back into place, not sealing it fully, but enough to block the worst drafts. The change is immediate. Outside, the wind is a living thing, always pushing and pulling, a brute that never tires. In here, the air behaves. It holds its position. It doesn't yank warmth from skin with the same greedy speed. That, Mason realizes, is the first miracle. Not heat, but control. A space that can be controlled is a space that can be survived. He takes off one glove and runs bare fingers along a pole. The wood is cold, but not wet. The surface is worn smooth in places, like it has been handled many times. The poles rise and converge above him, a geometry both simple and deliberate. He has seen advanced shelters, inflatable frames, carbon fiber supports, engineered fabrics with price tags that make people brag. Yet these poles, plain, honest, feel more trustworthy than any marketing brochure. He recognizes what he is looking at without needing a manual. Load distribution, balance, robustness, redundancy. A structure that uses shape, not hardware, to win against weather. Shadow pauses near the wall and sniffs the lower seam where the cover meets the ground. He scratches once, gently, testing. His paw finds resistance, not loose fabric. He looks back at Mason with that steady, almost human seriousness, as if reporting, "It's tight. It's meant to be tight." Mason nods and begins a slow inspection, moving clockwise the way he's trained to clear spaces. There is no furniture, no modern clutter, no obvious supplies. Still, the teepee feels inhabited by thought. The floor is cleaner than he expects. The edges where snow has banked against the outside create a subtle thickening at the base. Mason can see how that would reduce wind intrusion without trapping moisture against the hide. The entrance faces east, and even in this pale winter light, the orientation seems purposeful, respectful. He thinks of the way the sun rises like a promise each day whether anyone deserves it or not. He thinks of how modern people build for convenience, not for reverence, and then act surprised when their lives feel hollow. He spots a central patch of darker ground where a fire pit would be. The center is slightly lower, as if scooped and packed. Around it, stones have been arranged, some half-buried, some visible, all placed with a kind of patient order. Mason crouches, presses a gloved hand near the stones, and senses only cold. No recent fire, no hidden warmth. If this shelter has been used, it hasn't been used lately. That should worry him, and part of him does remain cautious. Abandoned structures can be traps in their own way, but another part of him feels oddly grateful. It means he isn't intruding on someone's living home. He is stepping into a lesson left behind. Shadow's nose lifts toward the upper air, and he makes a quiet sound in his throat. Not a growl, not a bark, more like a small question. Mason follows the dog's gaze to the smoke hole and the two flaps near the top that can be angled. The flaps are stiffened and controlled by long exterior poles that would be operated from outside. Mason imagines someone standing in the wind, adjusting them with calm familiarity, turning smoke away the way a ship turns its bow into waves. He can almost feel how the air would move, cold air creeping in low, feeding a fire, warm air rising and finding the opening above. Not magic, physics, but the kind of physics only becomes survival when someone has lived with it long enough to respect it. He stands and walks to the wall again, then back to the center, testing the space with his body, like measuring the room without a tape. It's not large, maybe enough for a family. Mason pictures 8, 9, 10 people packed in here, shoulder to shoulder, sharing heat, sharing breath, sharing stories to keep the mind from freezing even when the air tries. He thinks of the team rooms he used to sleep in, men stacked in corners after missions, exhausted and safe for a few hours. Those rooms were full of jokes, insults, laughter sharp enough to cut tension. Then he thinks of the last room he was in with his teammate, the one who didn't come home, and the memory tries to rise like smoke that won't find its exit. Mason clamps down on it the way he's learned to, as if his mind is a hatch he can dog shut. He focuses instead on the teepee's quiet logic, on what can be proven with hands and eyes. Outside, The wind hits the walls hard enough to make the cover shiver. The teepee answers with a low, steady flex. It doesn't fight the wind by staying rigid. It yields just enough to survive. Mason feels something inside him respond to that idea. He has spent years being rigid. Tight jaw, tight schedule, tight control. He has been a man built to hold shape under pressure, and yet pressure found the smallest weakness and broke something anyway. Maybe survival isn't only strength. Maybe it's also intelligent yielding, bending without collapsing, moving without snapping. Shadow pads closer and leans his shoulder lightly against Mason's knee, a subtle contact that is both comfort and insistence. The dog's fur is cold at the tips, warmer underneath. Mason rests a hand on Shadow's neck, fingers sinking into thick winter coat. He feels the dog's steady pulse, the simple fact of life continuing. Shadow looks up, ears slightly forward, reading Mason's face like he has done 1,000 times. Shadow's expression is not dramatic, it's practical, but it carries a message anyway. We're here. Use it. Mason reaches into his pack and pulls out a small LED headlamp, clicks it on, and sweeps light across the interior more carefully. No signs of modern trespass, no trash, no graffiti. The shelter is quiet, preserved, respectful. He spots faint marks where ropes might have hung, where an inner liner could have been attached. He remembers the historian's words, how winter tippies used a second inner wall to trap dead air, how that dead air was the real blanket, how the system made warmth a stable thing rather than a fleeting gift. He can't see the liner now, but the structure still speaks of it, like an old tree stump still showing rings of past seasons. Mason feels his curiosity sharpen into something like admiration. Whoever designed this did not guess. They tested, refined, corrected, over generations, over lifetimes. While modern people chase convenience, these builders chased mastery. He sits down carefully near the edge, keeping distance from the center as if the fire pit is sacred. He flexes his fingers, feels them sting as blood returns. His boots are crusted with snow, and he knocks them gently against each other to shed what he can. Shadow lies down near the entrance, angled so he can see outside through any gap in the flap, a habit from his working years. Even resting, Shadow is guarding, as natural as breathing. Mason smiles faintly at the dog's seriousness. There's humor in it, an old soldier who refuses to retire, even when no one has asked him to work. The smile fades into something softer. Mason understands that stubbornness too well. He takes a slow inventory of time and risk. He is miles from town. The truck is behind him. The wind is increasing. The safest move is to return to the vehicle before visibility worsens. But Mason also knows the cold doesn't forgive indecision. If he leaves and loses the tipi in blowing snow, he might not find it again. And if the truck fails to start later, or if he slides off the road, this shelter may be the difference between discomfort and disaster. He is trained to prioritize survival. Yet survival is not only physical for him anymore. There is something else he came looking for, even if he has never said it aloud. A reason to stop feeling like his life is a hallway of closed doors. Mason stands again and moves to the entrance. He lifts the flap slightly and looks out. The sky has flattened further, a blank gray pressing down. Snow is beginning to move in thicker streams across the ground. The horizon blurs. The prairie is becoming a white eraser. He hears the wind's voice change, less playful, more commanding. He knows this tone. It's the tone weather uses when it stops allowing mistakes. He lets the flap fall back. Shadow rises and steps closer, ears alert. Mason looks down at him. "We stay," he says quietly, more statement than question. Shadow's tail gives one slow sweep, as if agreeing with the plan without needing praise. Mason begins to prepare the space the way a disciplined man prepares any temporary home. He clears a small area, checks his lighter, lays out what he has. He doesn't build a fire yet. He wants to be deliberate, careful, not waste fuel, or fill the shelter with smoke before he understands the airflow. Instead, he focuses on conserving heat and avoiding sweat. He takes off his outer shell briefly to vent, then puts it back on before he chills. He lets the teepee teach him its rules rather than imposing his own. As he works, a thought settles over him with an odd gentleness. This teepee is not merely a shelter he stumbled upon. It is a message that has survived the centuries. People once lived here with brilliance and patience, with respect for the land's cruelty and beauty. They did not call this place empty. They did not treat winter as an enemy to be conquered. They treated it as a force to be understood, negotiated with, and, when possible, turned into an ally. Mason feels something unclench in his chest, not fully, not magically, but a fraction, like the first crack in ice. He kneels beside Shadow and scratches behind the dog's ear, finding the spot that makes Shadow's eyes half close. "You feel it too, don't you?" Mason murmurs. It's a strange thing to say to a dog, but Shadow's calm makes it seem less strange. The dog exhales, long and steady, as if answering in the only language he needs. Outside, the wind rages. Inside, the teepee holds. And Chapter 2 ends there, exactly where it should. Mason and Shadow have found not only a structure, but a system, an ancient intelligence embedded in wood, hide, orientation, and air. Mason's curiosity has sharpened into respect, and his decision has been made. He will stay, learn, and survive the night not by modern bravado, but by listening to what this place has been trying to teach for generations. The decision to light a fire is never casual in a place like this. Mason knows that from training, from cold nights where one careless spark could mean smoke blindness or worse. Fire is comfort, yes, but it is also discipline. Inside the teepee, it becomes something even more precise, a conversation between heat, air, and structure. Mason moves with the quiet seriousness of someone handling a living thing. He clears the center carefully, brushing away loose snow and debris until the darker earth beneath shows through. The pit is shallow but deliberate, its edges reinforced with stones smoothed by time and use. He touches one briefly with a bare finger and pulls back at once, the cold sharp as a needle. These stones have memory, he thinks. They have been heated and cooled more times than anyone could count. They know what they are for. From his pack, Mason removes a small bundle of tinder, dry grass he collected earlier, a few curls of shaved wood, no accelerants, no shortcuts. He kneels low, positioning himself so his body blocks any stray drafts from the entrance. Shadow watches from his spot near the wall, ears forward, eyes tracking every movement. The dog is alert but calm. Fire, to him, is familiar. He has slept beside it in deserts and mountains, learned early that flames are not to be feared, only respected. Mason strikes the lighter once, nothing, twice. On the third attempt, a flame appears, small and defiant. He cups it with his hand, feeds it gently into the tinder. Smoke rises immediately, thin and gray, curling upward like a question. Mason freezes, eyes lifting toward the smoke hole. The teepee answers almost at once. The smoke climbs, hesitates for a heartbeat, then finds its way out, drawn upward by the natural pull of warmer air. Mason feels a subtle shift around his ankles, a faint movement, cold air sliding in low, exactly as it should. The system engages. He adds a sliver of wood. The fire catches, brightening, its light flickering across the interior walls. Shadows dance along the poles, stretching and shrinking with each movement of the flame. The teepee changes character entirely. What was a quiet shelter becomes a living space. The fire's crackle is modest, controlled, not roaring. Mason keeps it that way. This is not a bonfire. It is a heartbeat. As the fire settles, warmth begins to spread. Not explosively, but steadily. Mason feels it first on his shins, then along his hands as he holds them out, palms open. The heat is clean, dry. He watches how it behaves, how it rises and flows, how it does not linger uselessly near the ceiling but cycles, guided by the liner gap he imagined earlier and the structure's natural draft. The women who designed this knew exactly how fire breathes, he realizes. They didn't overpower it. They gave it a path. Shadow shifts position, abandoning his earlier post near the entrance. He pads closer to the fire, stopping at a respectful distance, then lowers himself onto the ground with a satisfied grunt. His body angles so one side catches the warmth, while the other stays cool, a compromise perfected over years of instinct. Within minutes, the dog's posture changes, muscles loosen, his breathing deepens. One ear flicks lazily, no longer scanning every sound. Mason notices this and feels a quiet amusement tug at him. Even Shadow, soldier to the bone, knows when it's safe to stand down. Mason sits opposite the dog, legs extended, boots pointed toward the fire. He removes his outer gloves fully and holds his hands close enough to feel the heat without risking sweat. He watches the smoke flaps respond to a gust outside, shifting slightly, adjusting the draw. The fire remains well behaved. Smoke does not pool. His eyes do not sting. The teepee is doing what it was designed to do without asking for thanks. The warmth sharpens Mason's awareness of his own body. The ache in his fingers dulls. The tightness across his shoulders eases by a degree or two. He realizes how long he has lived braced against invisible threats, noise, movement, memory. Here, the threats are obvious and honest. Cold, wind, exhaustion. There is relief in that simplicity. You cannot argue with the cold. You can only respond correctly or suffer. He glances at Shadow again. The dog has stretched out now, chin resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded. A low sigh escapes him, content and unguarded. It is a sound Mason has learned to treasure because it means Shadow feels safe enough to rest deeply. Mason smiles, a real one this time, brief but genuine. "You found your spot," he murmurs. Shadow's tail thumps once, lazily, as if acknowledging a compliment he doesn't need. The fire pops softly, releasing a spark that vanishes before reaching the wall. Mason adjusts a piece of wood, maintaining balance. He thinks about the families who once sat exactly like this, hands outstretched, children dozing near the edges, elders telling stories that carried knowledge disguised as myth. Firelight would have softened faces, turned fear into something manageable. Mason understands now why the fire pit was placed precisely at the center. It isn't just about heat distribution, it's about gravity, social gravity. Everything gathers around it. As minutes pass, the interior temperature rises noticeably. Mason doesn't have a thermometer, but he doesn't need one. His breath no longer clouds the air with every exhale. The cold stops feeling like an active attacker and becomes background noise. He knows the numbers from the historian's stories, how teepees could maintain temperatures that would shock modern campers, but experiencing it firsthand carries a different weight. This is not theory. This is proof. Outside, the storm howls louder, as if offended by the fire's success. Snow slams against the hide. The teepee answers with a steady hush, absorbing sound, deflecting force. Mason watches the flame and thinks of how many times he has been taught to dominate environments, to overpower uncertainty with aggression and speed. Sitting here, he feels the counter lesson settle in. Endurance is quieter, smarter, often guided by those who were never allowed the luxury of failure. Shadow rolls slightly onto his side, exposing his belly to the warmth, a gesture of complete trust. Mason chuckles under his breath. "Unbelievable," he says softly. "We're in the middle of nowhere, in a storm that could kill us, and you're napping." Shadow doesn't respond. He doesn't need to. His relaxed posture is answer enough. Mason feeds the fire one last careful piece of wood, and then leans back on his hands, letting the heat soak in. The fire burns clean. The air flows. The teepee breathes. For the first time in longer than he wants to admit, Mason feels something like equilibrium. Not happiness, not peace, but balance. A sense that things are, for this moment, exactly as they should be. Chapter 4 ends here, with the fire established and accepted, the heart of the teepee alive. Mason and Shadow have moved beyond shelter into habitation. The ancient system has revealed another layer of its intelligence, and in its steady glow, Mason begins to understand that warmth is not merely the absence of cold. It is the presence of order, patience, and trust. The decision to light a fire is never casual in a place like this. Mason knows that from training, from cold nights where one careless spark could mean smoke blindness or worse. Fire is comfort, yes, but it is also discipline. Inside the teepee, it becomes something even more precise. A conversation between heat, air, and structure. Mason moves with the quiet seriousness of someone handling a living thing. He clears the center carefully, brushing away loose snow and debris until the darker earth beneath shows through. The pit is shallow but deliberate, its edges reinforced with stones smoothed by time and use. He touches one briefly with a bare finger and pulls back at once, the cold sharp as a needle. These stones have memory, he thinks. They have been heated and cooled more times than anyone could count. They know what they are for. From his pack, Mason removes a small bundle of tinder, dry grass he collected earlier, a few curls of shaved wood, no accelerants, no shortcuts. He kneels low, positioning himself so his body blocks any stray drafts from the entrance. Shadow watches from his spot near the wall, ears forward, eyes tracking every movement. The dog is alert but calm. Fire, to him, is familiar. He has slept beside it in deserts and mountains, learned early that flames are not to be feared, only respected. Mason strikes the lighter once, nothing. Twice. On the third attempt, a flame appears, small and defiant. He cups it with his hand, feeds it gently into the tinder. Smoke rises immediately, thin and gray, curling upward like a question. Mason freezes, eyes lifting toward the smoke hole. The teepee answers almost at once. The smoke climbs, hesitates for a heartbeat, then finds its way out, drawn upward by the natural pull of warmer air. Mason feels a subtle shift around his ankles, a faint movement, cold air sliding in low, exactly as it should. The system engages. He adds a sliver of wood. The fire catches, brightening, its light flickering across the interior walls. Shadows dance along the poles, stretching and shrinking with each movement of the flame. The teepee changes character entirely. What was a quiet shelter becomes a living space. The fire's crackle is modest, controlled, not roaring. Mason keeps it that way. This is not a bonfire. It is a heartbeat. As the fire settles, warmth begins to spread, not explosively, but steadily. Mason feels it first on his shins, then along his hands as he holds them out, palms open. The heat is clean, dry. He watches how it behaves, how it rises and flows, how it does not linger uselessly near the ceiling but cycles, guided by the liner gap he imagined earlier and the structure's natural draft. The women who designed this knew exactly how fire breathes, he realizes. They didn't overpower it. They gave it a path. Shadow shifts position, abandoning his earlier post near the entrance. He pads closer to the fire, stopping at a respectful distance, then lowers himself onto the ground with a satisfied grunt. His body angles so one side catches the warmth, while the other stays cool, a compromise perfected over years of instinct. Within minutes, the dog's posture changes. Muscles loosen. His breathing deepens. One ear flicks lazily, no longer scanning every sound. Mason notices this and feels a quiet amusement tug at him. Even Shadow, soldier to the bone, knows when it's safe to stand down. Mason sits opposite the dog, legs extended, boots pointed toward the fire. He removes his outer gloves fully and holds his hands close enough to feel the heat without risking sweat. He watches the smoke flaps respond to a gust outside, shifting slightly, adjusting the draw. The fire remains well behaved. Smoke does not pool. His eyes do not sting. The teepee is doing what it was designed to do, without asking for thanks. The warmth sharpens Mason's awareness of his own body. The ache in his fingers dulls. The tightness across his shoulders eases by a degree or two. He realizes how long he has lived braced against invisible threats, noise, movement, memory. Here, the threats are obvious and honest. Cold, wind, exhaustion. There is relief in that simplicity. You cannot argue with the cold. You can only respond correctly or suffer. He glances at Shadow again. The dog has stretched out now, chin resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded. A low sigh escapes him, content and unguarded. It is a sound Mason has learned to treasure because it means Shadow feels safe enough to rest deeply. Mason smiles, a real one this time, brief but genuine. "You found your spot," he murmurs. Shadow's tail thumps once, lazily, as if acknowledging a compliment he doesn't need. The fire pops softly, releasing a spark that vanishes before reaching the wall. Mason adjusts a piece of wood, maintaining balance. He thinks about the families who once sat exactly like this, hands outstretched, children dozing near the edges, elders telling stories that carried knowledge disguised as myth. Firelight would have softened faces, turned fear into something manageable. Mason understands now why the fire pit was placed precisely at the center. It isn't just about heat distribution, it's about gravity, social gravity. Everything gathers around it. As minutes pass, the interior temperature rises noticeably. Mason doesn't have a thermometer, but he doesn't need one. His breath no longer clouds the air with every exhale. The cold stops feeling like an active attacker and becomes background noise. He knows the numbers from the historian's stories, how teepees could maintain temperatures that would shock modern campers, but experiencing it firsthand carries a different weight. This is not theory. This is proof. Outside, the storm howls louder, as if offended by the fire's success. Snow slams against the hide. The teepee answers with a steady hush, absorbing sound, deflecting force. Mason watches the flame and thinks of how many times he has been taught to dominate environments, to overpower uncertainty with aggression and speed. Sitting here, he feels the counter lessons settle in. Endurance is quieter, smarter, often guided by those who were never allowed the luxury of failure. Shadow rolls slightly onto his side, exposing his belly to the warmth, a gesture of complete trust. Mason chuckles under his breath. "Unbelievable," he says softly. "We're in the middle of nowhere, in a storm that could kill us, and you're napping." Shadow doesn't respond. He doesn't need to. His relaxed posture is answer enough. Mason feeds the fire one last careful piece of wood and then leans back on his hands, letting the heat soak in. The fire burns clean. The air flows. The teepee breathes. For the first time in longer than he wants to admit, Mason feels something like equilibrium. Not happiness, not peace, but balance. A sense that things are, for this moment, exactly as they should be. Chapter 4 ends here, with the fire established and accepted, the heart of the teepee alive. Mason and Shadow have moved beyond shelter into habitation. The ancient system has revealed another layer of its intelligence, and in its steady glow, Mason begins to understand that warmth is not merely the absence of cold. It is the presence of order, patience, and patience and trust. The fire has settled into its rhythm by the time Mason begins preparing for the night. Not roaring, not fading, just a steady pulse of light and heat at the center of the teepee. Outside, the storm continues its long argument with the land, but inside, the air has softened. The temperature has risen enough that Mason no longer feels the cold pressing directly against his bones. It lingers instead at the edges, waiting, patient. Cold, he knows, never leaves. It only steps back. Mason studies the stones around the fire pit with renewed attention. They are not random. Each one is placed where it can absorb heat without cracking, where it can be moved safely without collapsing the pit. He chooses 3 stones carefully, rounded, dense, not too large to handle. He nudges them closer to the coals with a stick, turning them slowly, letting them drink in the fire. This is not something he learned in a manual. This is something his body understands instinctively, as if knowledge older than training is waking up under the pressure of necessity. Shadow lifts his head when Mason moves, eyes tracking him with lazy curiosity. The dog does not rise. He trusts the process now. The warmth has already worked its quiet magic on him. The stiffness in his limbs has eased, his breathing slowed to a deep, even cadence. Mason notices how Shadow has positioned himself with care, close enough to benefit from the heat, far enough to avoid sparks, spine aligned with the curve of the wall. Even rest, Shadow seems to believe, should be done professionally. Mason waits until the stones glow faintly, not red hot, but alive with stored energy. He tests one by bringing his palm near, feeling the radiating heat. Satisfied, he grips it with thick gloves, muscles tensing under the weight. The stone is heavier than it looks, dense with purpose. He carries it to the sleeping area along the wall, where he has cleared a shallow depression in the packed snow floor. He places the stone carefully, then covers it with folded fabric and a piece of hide from his pack. He repeats the process with the other stones, spacing them so the heat will spread evenly rather than concentrate in one dangerous point. As he works, Mason thinks of the women again, the ones who would have done this night after night, not as a novelty but as routine, heating stones, wrapping them, placing them beneath sleeping areas so children wouldn't wake shivering in the dark. This was not heroism. This was responsibility, the kind that doesn't make stories unless someone stops long enough to notice. He lowers himself onto his bedroll and tests the effect. At first, there is only a hint of warmth beneath him. Then, slowly, unmistakably, the heat begins to rise. It seeps upward, steady and unhurried, like sunlight reaching through thick cloud. Mason exhales, surprised despite himself. This warmth does not flicker like fire. It does not demand attention. It simply persists. It is the opposite of urgency. Shadow, sensing the change, stands and pads over, circling once before lowering himself near Mason's legs. He adjusts until one flank catches the rising heat from the stones. A low sound escapes him, not quite a groan, not quite a sigh, something between relief and approval. Mason smiles faintly. "Yeah," he murmurs, "I get it." The contrast between this warmth and the fire's heat is striking. Fire is immediate, visible, dramatic. Stones are patient. They hold what they are given and release it slowly, without complaint. Mason finds his thoughts drawn to that difference. He has lived most of his life like fire, fast, intense, consuming resources at a rate justified only by emergency. Missions demanded it, lives depended on it. But what happens when the emergency ends? What happens when a man built for fire has to learn how to be stone? The question lingers without demanding an answer. Mason lies back and stares upward, following the lines of the poles as they converge toward the smoke hole. The faint light from the fire flickers there, gentle now, like a memory rather than a command. The storm outside sounds distant, muffled, as if the teepee has taken its voice and wrapped it in hide. Mason feels his muscles loosen further, one by one, the way they rarely do when sleep is shallow and haunted. He becomes aware of smaller sensations, the steady warmth beneath his spine, the soft rise and fall of Shadow's breathing, the subtle creak of the structure responding to wind without panic. These are not luxuries. They are conditions for rest, true rest, the kind that allows the mind to stop standing guard for a while. A memory surfaces then, not violent, not sharp, but persistent. A night years ago, after a mission that ended badly. Mason had lain awake in a safe house, body exhausted, mind racing, unable to shut down. He remembers thinking that safety should feel better than this, that surviving should come with relief. It didn't. Not then. Not for a long time after. Lying here now, warmed by stones heated with intention, Mason realizes why. Safety without understanding is fragile. Comfort without meaning doesn't last. The women who designed this system understood that. They built not just to block cold, but to allow people to sleep, to dream, to wake functional. Stones that remember heat are not about survival alone. They are about continuity, about ensuring tomorrow has a chance to begin without exhaustion poisoning it first. Shadow shifts slightly in his sleep, paws twitching once, chasing something only he can see. Mason watches him with quiet affection. Shadow has always lived this way, Mason realizes, fully present. When it's time to work, he works. When it's time to rest, he rests. No spiraling, no second-guessing. Perhaps that is why dogs survive humans so well. They do not carry yesterday into every tomorrow. The warmth from the stones intensifies for a while, then steadies. Mason adjusts his position slightly, careful not to disturb the balance. He knows these stones will continue releasing heat for hours, long after the fire has burned low. This is the genius of it. Warmth that outlasts flame, heat that doesn't demand attention, a gift that keeps giving without needing to be watched. Outside, the storm reaches a peak. Wind screams, snow lashes. Somewhere in the dark, the prairie is erased and rewritten over and over again. Mason feels none of it directly. He is aware, but not threatened. The teepee stands, the stones hold, the system works. He closes his eyes, not to sleep fully yet, but to rest in that awareness. He allows himself to feel gratitude, not the loud kind, not the performative kind, but a quiet acknowledgement of competence passed down through hands long gone. Whoever first discovered that stones could be heated and buried to warm sleepers did not know Mason would one day benefit from that knowledge. They did not know Shadow would curl beside him. They did not know their solution would outlive them by centuries. They simply solved a problem well and trusted that would be enough. It was. Chapter 5 ends in stillness, the fire reduced to a steady glow, the stones releasing their stored warmth. Mason and Shadow resting in a pocket of livable calm, while the world outside freezes and rages. The lesson has deepened. Not all warmth needs to burn bright. Some of it only needs to last. Hunger arrives quietly in the cold. It does not announce itself with drama or pain at first. It comes as a hollowing, a subtle drain of focus and warmth. Mason notices it the way he notices everything now, early, before it can turn into weakness. His body has burned fuel steadily since leaving town, and even with the fire and the stones working in his favor, energy is not optional out here. It is currency. He sits up slowly, careful not to disturb the balance of warmth beneath him, and reaches for his pack. Shadow opens one eye, assessing the movement, then lets it close again when he realizes this is not a threat, but a routine. The dog's trust is complete. Mason finds himself respecting that more than he ever has. From the pack, he pulls a compact bundle wrapped in cloth. It is not modern freeze-dried rations or brightly labeled bars designed by committees. It is pemmican, dense, dark, unassuming. Dried meat pounded fine, mixed with rendered fat, bound together with crushed berries. Mason had prepared it weeks ago after speaking with the historian, more out of curiosity than confidence. He had tested it at home, found it heavy, almost stubborn in the mouth. Now, in the teepee, it feels like exactly what it is meant to be. He breaks off a piece with his fingers. It does not crumble easily. The fat has set firm in the cold, holding everything together. Mason chews slowly, deliberately, letting his teeth and saliva do their work. The flavor is rich but not indulgent, savory and faintly sweet, without any sharp edges. It tastes like effort, like patience. He feels the warmth spread almost immediately, not from heat, but from fuel reaching muscles and blood. This food does not spike energy, it sustains it. Shadow lifts his head fully now, eyes focused. Mason smiles and breaks off a smaller portion, offering it on his palm. Shadow sniffs, cautious, then takes it gently, chewing with the seriousness he applies to all tasks. His ears tilt forward as he processes the unfamiliar texture. Then he swallows, pauses, and looks at Mason. The look is unmistakable, acceptable. Shadow licks his lips once and settles back down, satisfied. Mason leans against one of the poles and continues eating in small bites, resisting the temptation to rush. Out here, overeating wastes resources just as much as undereating weakens the body. He thinks again of the people who perfected this food, not as a delicacy but as a solution. Pemmican was not designed to impress. It was designed to keep people alive through months when fresh food was impossible. 1 pound, thousands of calories. No excess, no apology. He imagines rawhide bags hanging from the tipi poles, filled with this same food, safe from moisture and animals. He imagines underground caches dug into frozen earth, lined with bark, storing roots and preserved vegetables through winter. Systems layered on systems, each one anticipating failure and compensating for it. Mason feels a flicker of admiration sharpen into something closer to awe. Modern supply chains collapse with frightening ease. These people plan for isolation as a given, not an emergency. The act of eating shifts the atmosphere inside the teepee. The fire crackles softly. The stones continue their slow work beneath him. Shadow's breathing deepens again. Mason feels strength returning, not the explosive strength of adrenaline, but the quiet resilience of a body properly fed. His thoughts become steadier, less jagged. He realizes how often hunger has masqueraded as anxiety in his life. How many decisions have been sharpened by empty reserves rather than clear judgment. He finishes the portion he intended and wraps the rest carefully, tucking it back into the pack. Discipline matters here. There is no grocery store to correct mistakes. He wipes his hands on a cloth and sits quietly for a moment, listening to the teepee respond to the storm. The structure creaks, but it does not complain. The sound reminds him of a ship riding heavy seas, alive, flexible, aware. Mason thinks about how modern life treats food. Convenience first, abundance second, meaning last. Eating has become something squeezed between obligations, performed without attention. Here, every bite matters. Every calorie is acknowledged. There is a strange dignity in that. Food becomes part of the relationship between human and environment, not a distraction from it. Shadow stirs again and shifts closer, pressing his back lightly against Mason's leg. The dog's body is warm now, solid and reassuring. Mason rests a hand on Shadow's shoulder, feeling muscle beneath fur, life beneath skin. Good timing, he murmurs, not sure whether he means the food, the shelter, or the partnership that has carried them both this far. Outside, the storm begins to lose some of its sharpness. The wind is still strong, but its voice changes, less furious, more tired. Mason senses the shift without seeing it. He knows the night is not over, but it has passed a threshold. They are no longer merely enduring, they are functioning. He lies back again, letting digestion do its quiet work. Warmth from the stones, heat from the fire, energy from the food. All of it layers together into something stable. Mason understands now why pemmican and typees belong in the same story. Both are products of a worldview that values efficiency over excess, endurance over comfort, foresight over improvisation. Together, they turn an impossible winter into a manageable one. As his eyelids grow heavy, Mason feels a sense of alignment settle over him. His body is warm, his mind is clear, his companion is safe. For the first time in a long while, he does not feel like he is borrowing time. He feels like he is using it correctly. Chapter 6 ends here, with nourishment completed and strength restored. Mason and Shadow are no longer just sheltered and warm, they are fueled. The ancient knowledge of survival has revealed another layer. Warmth keeps you alive, but food allows you to continue. In the deep cold, endurance is built bite by deliberate bite. Mason wakes before he realizes he has been asleep. There is no sudden jolt, no sharp breath dragged from his chest the way it used to happen after missions. Instead, consciousness returns gradually, like light seeping through cloud. For a moment, he does not know where he is. Then the quiet registers. The fire has burned low, reduced to glowing embers. The stones beneath him are still warm, their heat softer now, gentler, like a hand resting instead of gripping. Shadow is curled against his legs, solid and present. A familiar weight anchoring him to the ground. Outside, the storm has changed character again. The wind still moves across the prairie, but it no longer screams. It circles, it slides. Mason listens, not with tension, but with interest. The teepee responds with subtle sounds, wood flexing, hide whispering, an ongoing negotiation rather than a battle. He sits up slowly and rubs his hands together, feeling stiffness rather than pain. That alone feels like a small victory. He moves to the entrance and lifts the flap just enough to look out. The night has thinned. Dawn is approaching, though the sun itself is still hidden. The world beyond the teepee is a muted blue-gray, snow sculpted into long ridges by the wind. What stops him, however, is not the color or the cold. It is the pattern. From this angle, he can see how the land dips and rises around the teepee, how subtle contours create pockets of relative calm. He remembers the historian's words again, how teepees were rarely placed at random. They were arranged deliberately, often in circles, each shelter angled to shield the next, entrances facing east, backs turned to the worst winds. One home was never meant to stand alone. It was meant to belong to a formation. Mason steps fully outside, careful with his footing. The cold greets him again, sharp but no longer shocking. He breathes it in, steady and controlled. Shadow follows, stopping just behind him, ears forward, alert but composed. Mason turns slowly, scanning the surrounding ground, imagining where other teepees would have stood. He can see it now, a ring of homes, smoke rising from multiple openings, children moving between shelters, elders seated near the center where stories and decisions were shared. Wind hitting the outer edge and breaking, confused, robbed of its strength before it could reach the heart of the camp. A community windbreak. The idea lands heavier than Mason expects. He has lived most of his adult life in units that prize brotherhood, yet trained men to operate independently at a moment's notice. He knows the value of teamwork intimately, but he also knows how easily that bond dissolves once the structure is gone, once uniforms are hung up and ranks stop mattering. After retirement, the circle disappeared. Everyone scattered. Survival became a solo act, dressed up as resilience. Standing here, Mason understands the flaw in that thinking. These people did not survive because they were tougher as individuals. They survived because they arranged their lives to reduce exposure, to wind, to hunger, to despair. They built systems that assumed weakness was inevitable and compensated for it collectively. Shadow steps forward and sniffs the snow, then looks back at Mason, waiting. The dog does not wander far. He never does. Even now, with no visible threat, Shadow maintains a radius, an invisible tether. Mason feels something shift in his chest. Shadow has always known what Mason is only now admitting. Being alone is not the same as being independent. Mason crouches and presses his gloved hand into the snow, feeling its crust and powder layers. The cold seeps in slowly. He imagines 8 to 10 people inside a single teepee, body heat adding to fire and stones, each person contributing simply by being there. No one expected to endure winter alone. No one praised for suffering silently. The design itself rejects isolation. He thinks of the nights after he left the teams, sitting in his house with lights on, heat running, silence so loud it felt hostile. He had told himself he needed space, time, control. What he needed, he sees now, was a circle. Shadow nudges his knee, impatient. Mason smiles faintly and straightens. "Yeah," he says quietly, "I see it." They move a short distance from the teepee, Mason careful not to stray far, not wanting to lose the shelter in shifting light. From this vantage point, the teepee looks smaller than it felt inside, yet stronger, its shape purposeful against the open land. Mason realizes that its true strength is not just structural. It is contextual. It belongs to something larger than itself, even when standing alone. He returns inside, sealing the flap behind him. The interior feels warmer than before, as if the space has learned them. Shadow shakes off snow and resumes his place near Mason without instruction. Mason feeds the fire gently, not to reignite it fully, but to acknowledge it. The flame responds obediently. Sitting there, Mason allows the thought to fully form. Survival is not about proving how much cold you can withstand. It is about arranging your life so cold has less access to you. That applies far beyond weather. It applies to grief, to memory, to the slow erosion that happens when men convince themselves they must carry everything alone. He looks at Shadow, at the steady presence beside him, and understands that this too is a circle, smaller, quieter, but no less real. Two beings sharing warmth, responsibility, and awareness. Mason rests his forearm against the dog's back. Shadow leans in, solid and wordless. Outside, the first true light of morning begins to touch the snow. The storm has passed its worst. Inside the teepee, Mason feels something settle into place. Not closure, not resolution, but orientation. He knows where he is now, not just geographically, but relationally. Chapter 7 ends with that understanding. The teepee is not merely a shelter designed for cold, it is a blueprint for belonging. Mason has learned that strength is amplified, not diminished, when shared, and that survival, at its deepest level, was never meant to be a solitary achievement. Morning arrives without ceremony. There is no dramatic sunrise, no blaze of color across the sky. Instead, light simply spreads, thin, pale, and quiet, until the inside of the teepee no longer belongs to night. Mason opens his eyes fully this time, alert but rested, the kind of rest that reaches deeper than muscle. The fire has burned down to ash and faint embers. The stones beneath him have cooled, still holding the last memory of warmth, like a promise slowly kept. Shadow lifts his head at the same moment Mason does, as if their internal clocks have learned to move together. The dog stretches, joints cracking softly, then sits, calm and ready. Outside, the world has changed. Mason steps out of the teepee and pauses, letting the cold meet him on honest terms. It is still bitter. Winter has not softened its grip, but it no longer feels hostile. The storm has passed, leaving behind a landscape scrubbed clean and rearranged. Snow lies smooth and sculpted, the wind's work visible in long, elegant lines. The sky is brighter now, a muted silver blue that suggests possibility rather than threat. Breath rises from Mason's mouth in slow clouds, steady and controlled. His body knows how to be here now. Shadow follows, standing at Mason's side, ears forward, reading the open land. The dog looks older in the daylight, gray around the muzzle more visible, the scar above his eye catching the light. But there is strength in his posture, quiet and unforced. Shadow does not scan the horizon for enemies. He scans it for information. The difference matters. Mason turns slowly, taking in the teepee from the outside. In daylight, its simplicity is even more striking. Poles rise cleanly, their lines purposeful. The cover sits tight, unadorned, unashamed of function. Snow is banked carefully at the base, just as it should be. The entrance faces east, open now to the weak winter sun. Nothing about it is accidental. Nothing about it is excessive. He realizes, standing there, that winter did not spare him last night. It simply failed to defeat him. That distinction settles heavily, and then lightly, in his chest. For years, Mason has framed survival as a contest. Him versus environment, him versus memory, him versus whatever came next. The teams trained him well for that worldview. Win, endure, push through. But the teepee taught him something different, something quieter and far more sustainable. Survival here was not achieved by domination. It was achieved by alignment. The shelter did not fight the cold, it redirected it. The fire did not rage, it behaved. The stones did not burn, they remembered. And Mason did not conquer winter. He listened to it. Shadow moves a few steps ahead, then stops and looks back, checking distance. Always checking. Mason smiles, the expression easier now, less guarded. "I'm coming," he says, though there is no urgency in his voice. They have time. For once, time does not feel like an enemy either. Inside the teepee, Mason packs, slowly. He leaves nothing behind that wasn't already there. He smooths the ground where he slept, scatters ash respectfully, and adjusts the entrance flap so it rests as it should. This place is not his to claim. It is his to acknowledge. He places a gloved hand briefly against one of the poles, feeling the cold wood beneath. There is gratitude in the gesture, quiet and complete. Before leaving, he stands in the center one last time and looks up at the smoke hole, now open to clean morning air. Light spills down, gentle and steady. Mason feels the full shape of the lesson settle into him, not as words, but as orientation. He understands now why entire civilizations thrived here, where modern humans would struggle to survive a single night. They did not rely on strength alone, they relied on wisdom passed hand to hand, generation to generation, refined by failure and preserved by care. Outside, Shadow waits, patient as always. They begin the walk back toward the truck together, footprints marking the snow briefly before the wind begins its slow work of erasure. Mason feels different as he walks, not lighter, not heavier, but steadier. The memories he carries have not vanished. The losses remain. But they no longer feel like proof of failure. They feel like part of the landscape, harsh, unavoidable, but navigable with the right knowledge and the right companions. When Mason reaches the rise and looks back one final time, the teepee stands quietly against the open land, unchanged, unconcerned with whether it is remembered. Mason knows he will remember it anyway, not as a place he survived, but as a place that taught him how. Winter has not ended. The cold still rules this land, but winter is no longer his enemy, and with Shadow walking beside him, steady and unafraid, Mason understands the final truth the Great Plains have been waiting to offer. Survival is not about enduring the storm alone. It is about learning how to live well, even when the storm does not care. Chapter 8 ends there, not with triumph, but with balance. Mason and Shadow leave the teepee behind, carrying forward an ancient lesson, one that turns survival into understanding, and understanding into a quiet, lasting kind of peace. Final message: the quiet miracle. Sometimes God does not stop the storm. Sometimes he teaches us how to stand inside it. On that frozen plain, no angels appeared in the sky, no thunder split the clouds. Yet a miracle still happened. A man found shelter, a loyal dog found rest. An ancient wisdom, placed there long before either of them were born, became the answer at exactly the right moment. That is often how God works in our daily lives. Not through loud signs, but through quiet preparation. Through people who came before us. Through lessons written into the world itself. Through warmth that lasts, even when the fire fades. Maybe today you are facing your own winter. Loss, loneliness, fear, or exhaustion. Maybe the storm hasn't ended yet. But if you are still breathing, if you are still standing, perhaps God has already placed a shelter somewhere along your path. Sometimes it looks like help from a stranger. Sometimes it looks like a loyal companion. Sometimes it looks like strength you didn't know you still had. Faith doesn't always mean the storm disappears. Faith means believing you were never meant to face it alone. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We read every one. And if you believe in stories that remind us of love, loyalty, and God's quiet miracles, please subscribe to this channel so we can walk this journey together. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you. May He bring warmth into your coldest seasons, light into your darkest nights, and peace into your heart. And may you always find shelter, right when you need it most.